James had always thought his marriage was solid. Sure, they had their ups and downs, but he never doubted Emily's loyalty. That was until tonight, when his world shattered in a way he never saw coming. It began with a message. A simple, accidental notification on Emily's phone that popped up while she was in the shower. James wasn't one to pry, but the name on the screen wasn't familiar, and the message preview, "Last night was amazing. I can't wait to see you again," froze him in place. His stomach churned as curiosity turned into dread. Against his better judgment, he unlocked her phone using the code he knew by heart. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Months of texts, photos, and even hotel reservations between Emily and a man named David. He sat there, numb, as the evidence of her betrayal scrolled before his eyes. By the time Emily came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel and humming a tune, James was sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in his hand and a look that could pierce steel. The moment she saw him, she froze. "What's wrong?" she asked, but her voice was already trembling. "Who's David's?" James asked, his tone calm, which only made it more terrifying. He watched as her face drained of color, the towel slipping slightly as she clutched it tighter. "What are you talking about?" She tried to laugh, but it came out jagged, broken. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he said, tossing the phone onto the table. It landed screen up, the incriminating messages still glowing. Emily's eyes darted from the phone to James, and then she crumbled. What followed was 22 minutes of pure chaos. Emily started with denial, grabbing the phone and claiming it wasn't what it looked like. "He's just a friend," she stammered, but James wasn't buying it. "Friends don't book hotel rooms," he shot back, his voice rising for the first time. Denial turned to anger. She accused him of invading her privacy, yelling that he had no right to go through her phone. But James didn't back down. "You gave up your right to privacy the moment you decided to cheat," he said, his words cutting through her like a knife. Then came the tears. She sobbed uncontrollably, dropping to her knees and begging him to forgive her. "It didn't mean anything," she cried. "It was a mistake, James. I love you." But James couldn't unsee what he'd seen or unfeel the betrayal that had sunk deep into his chest. He demanded the truth, and bit by bit it spilled out. She admitted to the affair, said it had started as a harmless flirtation that spiraled out of control. She blamed stress, loneliness, and even James himself, claiming he had been distant. "You're blaming me for this?" he asked, his voice breaking. No, that's not what I mean," she sobbed, reaching for him, but he recoiled as if her touch burned. I messed up so bad. Please, James, please don't leave me." The 22 minutes felt like an eternity, a whirlwind of rage, heartbreak, and desperation. By the end of it, Emily was sitting on the floor, mascara streaked down her cheeks, begging for another chance. James stood over her, his heart in pieces, wondering if their marriage could ever recover from this, or if he even wanted it to. For the first time, James saw his wife not as the woman he loved, but as a stranger who had betrayed him in the worst way. He turned and walked out the door, leaving Emily in a puddle of her own regret. James stepped into the cold night air, his breath visible in the dim glow of the porch light. The silence outside was a sharp contrast to the storm raging inside his head. He pulled out his phone and dialed the only person he trusted to talk about this, his best friend, Marcus. "James? It's late. Everything okay?" Marcus answered groggily, his voice laced with concern. "No," James said, his voice cracking. "It's not okay. Emily, she's been cheating on me." The weight of saying it out loud made his knees weak. He sat down on the front steps, his head in his hands, as he told Marcus everything, the texts, the affair, her meltdown. "Man, I'm so sorry," Marcus said after a long pause. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," James admitted. "I can't even think straight right now. She's in there crying, begging me not to leave, but how do I forgive something like this? How do I trust her again?" They talked for a while, Marcus offering support but no easy answers. James didn't expect any. By the time he hung up, his mind was still a mess, but he felt a sliver of clarity. He needed space. When he walked back inside, Emily was still sitting on the floor, clutching a throw pillow like it was a lifeline. Her eyes were red and swollen, her breaths coming in uneven gasps. She looked up at him, hopeful, but he didn't sit down or reach out. "I'm staying at Marcus's tonight," he said, his voice flat. "James, no," she pleaded, scrambling to her feet. "Please don't go. We need to talk about this. We can fix this." "Not tonight," he said firmly. "I can't even look at you right now." Her face crumpled, but he didn't waver. He grabbed his coat and keys, ignoring her sobs as he walked out the door. At Marcus's place, the hours dragged by. Sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily and that other man together. The betrayal replayed in his mind like a broken record, each rotation cutting deeper than the last. By morning, James knew he couldn't avoid the conversation forever. He needed answers, real answers, not just the panicked apologies Emily had thrown at him the night before. He returned home, dreading what he'd find. Emily was waiting in the kitchen, clutching a mug of coffee like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "You're back," she said softly, her voice hoarse. "Yeah," James replied, setting his keys on the counter. "We need to talk." They sat across from each other at the table, the same table where their lives had unraveled the night before. James asked questions and Emily answered, each revelation twisting the knife a little deeper. She told him about how it started, innocent messages that turned into something more. She swore she never meant for it to happen, that she never stopped loving him. "Why didn't you just tell me you were unhappy?" he asked, his voice filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "Why not come to me instead of him?" "I don't know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was scared. I didn't want to admit that something was wrong. And then it just spiraled." Her excuses felt hollow, but James could see she was genuinely remorseful. The problem was, remorse didn't erase what she'd done. "I need time," he finally said. "Time to figure out if I can ever forgive you. If we can even move past this." "I'll do anything," Emily whispered. "Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just please, James, don't give up on us." He didn't respond right away. The truth was, he didn't know what he wanted. Part of him wanted to fight for their marriage, to believe that they could rebuild what had been broken. But another part of him, the part still raw with pain, was ready to walk away for good. As he left the table to clear his head, Emily's voice stopped him. "I know I don't deserve it, but I hope you'll give me a chance to make this right," she said, her voice trembling. James paused, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. He didn't answer because he didn't have an answer, not yet. The next few days were a blur of silence, reflection, and difficult conversations. Emily threw herself into repairing the damage, setting up counseling appointments and writing heartfelt letters that James wasn't ready to read. Meanwhile, James leaned on Marcus and other close friends, trying to make sense of his emotions. In the end, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever path he chose, it wouldn't be easy. Healing, whether it meant rebuilding their marriage or learning to let go, was going to take time. The days turned into weeks, each one filled with an awkward mix of tension, sadness, and tentative hope. James had moved into the guest room, a boundary he wasn't ready to cross yet. Emily, for her part, had been trying relentlessly to prove her commitment to making things right. She started going to individual therapy, showing James the appointment confirmations without being asked, and had even cut off all contact with David. She handed James her phone voluntarily, offering him full access as a gesture of transparency. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. One evening, after a particularly draining counseling session, James found himself sitting alone in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The counselor had asked him a question that had been haunting him ever since. "Do you still love her?" The truth was, he didn't know. He loved the woman he thought she was, the life they had built together. But the version of Emily sitting across from him in those sessions? She felt like a stranger. And yet, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where he saw glimpses of the woman he fell in love with. He couldn't deny that she was trying. But was it enough? That weekend, Emily approached him cautiously as he sipped his coffee in the living room. She looked hesitant, clutching a notebook in her hands. "I wrote something," she said softly. "For you. For us." James raised an eyebrow but nodded for her to continue. She opened the notebook and began to read. It was a letter, but more than that, it was an admission of her failures, a raw and unfiltered look into her guilt and regret. She didn't try to justify what she had done. Instead, she acknowledged the pain she caused and the trust she shattered. "I know I can't ask you to forgive me," she said, her voice cracking as she read the final lines. "But I promise, if you give me the chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your love again." When she finished, she looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in weeks, James felt something stir in his chest, a flicker of empathy, maybe even hope. "Thank you for saying all that," he said after a long pause. "But it's not just words, Emily. It's going to take time. A lot of time. And honestly, I don't know if I can ever feel the same way about us again." "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll wait as long as it takes." From that point on, things began to shift, albeit slowly. They continued their counseling sessions, both as a couple and individually. James started to see the effort Emily was putting in, not just to win him back, but to understand why she had made the choices she did. It didn't excuse her actions, but it made her feel a little more human, a little less like the villain his mind had painted her as. One night, weeks later, James found himself standing in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Emily as she slept. The weight of the decision he had to make pressed down on him. He thought about their history, the laughter, the milestones, the love that had once felt unshakable. And then he thought about the betrayal, the pain, the sleepless nights spent questioning everything. Could he forgive her? Could he trust her again? He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing. He wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. The next morning, as they sat across from each other at the breakfast table, James finally spoke the words that had been circling his mind for days. "I'm not saying everything is okay," he began, his voice steady but firm. "And I'm not saying I forgive you. But I think I'm willing to try, to see if we can rebuild this." Emily's eyes widened, hope flooding her face. "You mean it?" "I mean it," he said. "But you need to understand something. This is going to take a lot of work from both of us. And if I feel like it's not working, I won't hesitate to walk away." "I understand," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes, James. I swear." For the first time in months, James felt a small sense of relief. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for now, they had taken the first step. And that, at least, was something. The months that followed were some of the hardest of James and Emily's lives. They both knew the stakes. One misstep, one crack in their fragile rebuilding process, could be the end. They tread carefully, as if walking on glass, but both were committed to making it work, at least for now. Couples counseling became a regular fixture of their lives. At first, those sessions were raw and painful. James vented his anger and heartbreak, at times questioning aloud why he was even trying. Emily listened without defensiveness, tears often streaming silently down her face as she absorbed the weight of what she'd done. But slowly, the sessions began to shift. One day, their therapist asked James to talk about his fondest memory of Emily. At first, he balked at the idea, thinking it was pointless, but as he sat in silence, a moment came to mind. "It was our first anniversary," James said, his voice soft. "I had forgotten to make dinner reservations, and I was freaking out. But Emily, she just laughed. She said, 'Who needs a fancy restaurant? Let's make spaghetti and drink wine on the floor.' So that's what we did. We spent the night laughing, talking, and dancing in the kitchen. It wasn't what I planned, but it was perfect." Emily smiled through her tears. "I remember that night. It was one of the happiest nights of my life. For a brief moment, the tension between them lifted. The memory felt like a bridge, a reminder of what they once had. But the hard days still outnumbered the good. James struggled with triggers, small things that brought the betrayal rushing back. A late text notification on Emily's phone. The mention of David's name in passing. Even driving past the hotel where she had met him. Emily worked tirelessly to reassure him, but it was a constant battle against the doubts that lingered in his mind. One evening, as they sat on the couch after a long day, Emily turned to James with a nervous expression. "I've been thinking," she began cautiously. "Maybe it would help if we moved. Started fresh somewhere new. Away from all the memories of what happened." James frowned. "You think moving would fix this?" "Not fix," Emily said quickly. "I know nothing can erase what I did. But maybe a change of scenery could help us both heal." The idea wasn't entirely unwelcome. Their house, once a symbol of their life together, now felt haunted by the betrayal. Every corner seemed to hold a memory, some of them painful. After several long conversations, they agreed to sell the house and move to a quieter neighborhood a few towns over. The move, while stressful, brought a surprising sense of relief. Their new home was smaller but cozy, and for the first time in months, they both felt a glimmer of hope. In their new environment, they began to focus on rebuilding trust. Emily continued to be transparent about everything, where she was going, who she was with, even sharing her phone password without being asked. James, in turn, tried to let go of his need to constantly check up on her. There were setbacks, of course. One night, James had a vivid nightmare about Emily and David. He woke up in a cold sweat, the emotions so real it was as if the betrayal had just happened all over again. When Emily asked what was wrong, he told her, his voice trembling. "I can't stop seeing it," he admitted. "Even when you're doing everything right, it's like it's still there, waiting to ruin us." Emily held his hand, her own tears welling up. "I know, James. I know. And I hate that I did this to you. To us. I'll keep working, I promise. Just don't give up on me." In time, those moments of raw pain became less frequent. They found themselves laughing again, even enjoying simple things like cooking dinner together or watching movies on the couch. The love between them wasn't the same as it had been. It was scarred, weathered, but it was still there, fragile but real. 1 year after the night James discovered the affair, they found themselves sitting in the counselor's office for what had become their final session. "How do you feel about where you are now?" the therapist asked. James looked at Emily, who was nervously twisting her wedding ring. He took a deep breath. "I feel cautiously hopeful," he said. "It's not perfect. It'll never be perfect. But we've come a long way. And I think we've both learned how to fight for this. Really fight." Emily smiled through her tears. "I know I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did. But I'm so grateful you gave us this chance." As they walked out of the office hand in hand, James felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. He knew there would always be challenges, but for the first time, he believed they could face them together. Their love wasn't the same, but it was stronger in a way, built not on perfection, but on the hard, messy work of choosing each other despite the odds. In the weeks following their final counseling session, James and Emily settled into a new rhythm. Their relationship was still a work in progress, but the small victories began to feel like milestones. James noticed Emily's efforts to rebuild their connection. She would leave handwritten notes in his lunch, simple messages like, "Thinking of you today," or asterisk, "Thank you for giving us another chance." Asterisk at first, they felt like hollow gestures, but over time, he began to see them as genuine reflections of her love and regret. One Saturday morning, as they unpacked the last of the moving boxes, James found an old photo album. Inside were pictures from their early years, vacations, holidays, and candid moments filled with laughter. He handed it to Emily, who smiled softly as she flipped through the pages. "Remember this?" she said, pointing to a picture of them on a road trip, both wearing ridiculous sunglasses. James chuckled. "Yeah, you made us pull over just so we could take that picture." For a moment, the tension lifted, replaced by the warmth of shared memories. They sat together on the floor, flipping through the album and reminiscing. It was the first time in months they felt truly at ease. That evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, James found himself glancing at Emily. She wasn't perfect, neither of them were, but she was trying. He could see it in the way she leaned into every conversation, the way she took accountability without excuses, the way she carried her guilt without letting it define her. I've been thinking, James said suddenly, pausing the movie. Emily turned to him, her expression cautious but attentive. What's on your mind? This whole process, it's been harder than I ever imagined. But I think I'm starting to see a future for us again, he admitted. It's not the same as before, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need it to be. Emily's eyes welled with tears. I've hoped for that every day, James. I know I can never undo what I did, but I want to be better. For you, for us. He reached for her hand, holding it tightly. We've come this far. Let's keep going. From that night on, their relationship began to transform. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. But they found strength in their shared commitment to each other. They set new boundaries, made new traditions, and rediscovered what had brought them together in the first place. Months later, on the anniversary of the night James discovered the affair, Emily suggested they go out to dinner. Are you sure that's a good idea? James asked, hesitant. I think it's time, she said. We can't change what happened, but we can reclaim this day. Turn it into something new. They went to a small, quiet restaurant, nothing fancy, just a place where they could talk. Over dinner, they reflected on how far they'd come. This isn't the life I imagined for us, James said honestly. Me neither, Emily replied. But maybe it's the one we were meant to build. As they clinked glasses, James felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not just for their marriage, but for the future they were slowly, painfully, and beautifully rebuilding together.